Thank you, everyone. Good evening and welcome to part 2 of the Bronx River series. My name is Tracy Storr and I'm the program director of the Federated Conservationists of Westchester County. I'm here with Marissa Rodriguez and Brendan McNamara from FCWC. I'd also like to acknowledge FCWC's board president, Carol Durst-Wertheim, Stephen Levy, and Alicia Malloy, who are with us this evening from FCWC. I would also like to thank Sharon Rothman from the White Plains Public Library for partnering with us on this educational series and for use of this spectacular space. I'd also like to thank Ben Brown, who awarded FCWC with a grant to produce the educational series focusing on the Bronx River. Evan Pritchard of the Mi'kmaq descent has been doing field interviews with Native American elders since 1990 and has been the director of the Center for Algonquin Culture for the last 26 years. A lecturer on Native Studies at Vassar, Pace, Marist, Columbia, SUNY, John Jay, University of Ontario, University of Massachusetts, and Ramapo State. He's also presented at Gracie Mansion, the American Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian, and often presents classes online. He's currently presenting an art exhibit at the Woodstock Artists Association Museum, open until April, which he co-curated with director Nicole Goldberg with 18 landscapes from the 100-year-old archives. Evan's attached commentaries reveal little-known and sometimes unpublished Native histories of the beautiful landscapes selected. He's written over 50 books on Native culture, history, language, and spirituality, including Native New Yorkers, Henry Hudson and the Algonquins, Bird Medicine, Native American Stories of the Sacred. Anyway, he's lectured frequently on the Way of the Heron, a body of traditional Algonquin knowledge about conflict resolution and trust building. Evan facilitated workshops in Wabanaki culture and Northwood Stewardship Center. He has offered land acknowledgements for the past 30 years and has published many original history maps of Native American settlements east of the Mississippi. He was featured in Ted Timrick's film Hidden Landscapes, as well as Toby Carey's documentary for Mountain River. At this point, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Evan Pritchard. Thank you so much.
Hello, well, I thought maybe there'd be some stragglers, so I thought I'd start with a little flute so they wouldn't miss any of the educational part. But it is educational because, I'm representing Algonquin culture today, and it's a ribbon shirt, part of our culture, and music is part of our culture. The Mi'kmaq people improvise on the flute quite often, so you can kind of close your eyes for a minute and kind of meditate as you follow the sound of the flute. It's a single pointed meditation. It's very effective. Thank you. And I brought the drum. This is a moose drum, and the moose is the kind of our animal. And so I lugged it all the way here, so I thought I'd play a short welcome song. And sometimes I have people sing along, but I think I'll just sing it for you. Do you want to sing along?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll sing out of verses. Imagine that I'm on the shoreline and you're paddling into my territory and I want to check you out. This is like an IQ test, right? So, citizenship. So, I'm going to sing a phrase and you sing it back. One of them's harder than the others. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. No, you. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. Way hi ya, hey, yo, yo, way hi ya, hey, yo. Way hi ya, hey, yo, yo, way hi ya, hey, yo. Good. You a hi, way hi, yo, way. You a hi, way hi, yo, way. That's excellent. We'll go to, that was sung to the south, and we'll go clockwise to the west. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. Way hi, ya, hey, yo, yo, way hi, ya, hey, yo. Way hi, ya, hey, yo, yo, way hi, ya, hey, yo. You a hi, way hi, yo, way. Good. And the direction of the west is where music comes from in the medicine wheel, and the direction of the grandmothers. And then we turn clockwise to the north, the direction of the four-legged animals. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, you a hi ya. You a hi ya, hey, yo, yo, a hi ya, hey, yo. A hi ya, hey, yo, yo, a hi ya, hey, yo. You a hi, way hi, yo, way. You a hi, way hi, yo, way. And then we turn clockwise to the east, which is where the sun comes up, the direction of fire, and a spiritual point on the wheel. And we'll modulate to F sharp. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. You a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. Do you a hi, ya, hey, you a hi, ya. Hey, way, hey, ya, hey, yo, yo, way, hi, ya, hey, yo. Way, hi, ya, hey, yo, yo, way, hi, ya, hey, yo. You way, hi, yo, way. You way, hi, yo, way. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You are now welcome.
Chris, what does it mean? What have we been saying?
Oh, well, that the words are vocals. They express emotions and pure emotion. There's no literal meaning, but yeah, when we sing this song, the vocals show our happiness at that you're here. See, so you're welcome. So that's the answer.
Evan, what the ribbon shirt?
The ribbon shirt, yeah, this is a Mega Ma ribbon shirt, and I have a whole closet of ribbon shirts, but this is my favorite one, and it has the 6 ribbons, and the 6 ribbons are in order for those 4 directions, and north and up and down. So it's red in the east, white in the south, yellow or golden in the west, and then black in the north, and then green for Mother Earth. It was a very important direction. And then blue for Father Sky. And then there's a 7th direction, which you can't see. It's an invisible ribbon. Thanks for asking. So when while I'm wearing the shirt, my prayers go out all the time. It's a labor-saving device. Speaking of labor, I'm gonna maybe give your brains a workout today, just the way it works out on, so whatever, just various interruptions on the way here over the past 2 weeks have been enormous, and so I just it had a mind of its own, and so, it's a lot to take in, but hopefully it'll all make sense in the end. And also, I may skip over a few things. So this is Bronx River, past, present, and future, and you noticed on the left of your screen you see some native people and some settlers bringing their boats in to the river to cross, and the idea is they will probably portage at some point. And portaging, it has to do with carrying your boat out of one river and into another river system so that you double your pleasure, so to speak, and double the scope of your trade route. In the middle is White Plains Plaza, which represents the present, and the roads around White Plains, you'll be surprised, are very, very important native trails that have been paved over for some reason. And then on the far right, you see some of the new inventions that have been designed not so much for portaging, because you can't carry them, but to connect from one river to another. So that's what this panel is about. And so I'm going to get started here. Okay, so first of all, the word Algonquin is not really one of our words exactly. It means those people over there, and yeah, it was us. But Kichi-Atukwokan is what we call ourselves, the people who wear the skin of the white deer. And it's the northern boreal whitetail, if you want to know. And that's Atuk. And so what's interesting is, you see, I'm going to use this thing. This is the migratory territory, can you hear me, of the northern boreal whitetail deer. And this is the Virginia deer. And we're pretty much have the same migratory territory as this particular animal here. So we feel like it's our brother, you know, and related to it. So we call ourselves, you know, the people of the white-tailed deer. And so you see that area. And this is a map. The colored areas are tinted for Algonquin-speaking people at the time of contact. But in fact, they'd been here many thousands of years before that. This is just a blow-up of the coastal region. But you see it goes here, and it actually goes into Wisconsin and Minnesota over here. And I just had to cut it down for space. But it really is exactly the same, territory, migratory territory. And so the Arapaho and Cheyenne used to be in here, and then they moved out where you probably think of them being way out west, and so they followed the buffalo. So I'm gonna, so that's what I'm talking about, and I'm director of this A Center for Algonquin Culture, and so I'm gonna have a bit of a focus on the Algonquins today. But I'm talking about the Bronx River and waterways, and in the ancient past of the Bronx River. This is a muhul made from a tulip tree, which is pretty much salt waterproof. It lasts very long in salt or fresh water. The main type of transportation on the Bronx River long ago. And the boat would last for years, as I said, but the problem was it's way too heavy to carry. It weighs several tons, you know, so you'd be more likely to pick up your VW and carry it across the street. But so you had to stay in your watershed. But that was, I don't think they realized how limited they were. But they're beautiful. You know, you can see they're like sculptures. Like Henry Moore would have loved to have carved a mahul, but he never got to it. So then, this is the big thing, the technological revolution, like the transistor. The Algonquins invented the birch bark canoe way up in the upper Ottawa River Valley 7,000 years ago. And again, I have to quote this because nobody believes me, but of course it's since time immemorial, page 16, if you really want to know. Suddenly, boats could be carried from one watershed to another because these things only weigh, 60 pounds, maybe 100. But you have a team of two very strong people can carry it. But being able to carry your canoe from one watershed to another opens up these vast trade areas that I mentioned. And it's hard to do by yourself, but usually you're in some kind of community. And what's happened is, environmentally, as the birches have weakened, and I hear this from all the canoe makers, the native ones, they say, well, the birches aren't what they used to be, and the barks are too fragile and thin, so it's hard to make a good canoe anymore, but we do our best. They have to just take the finest bark and hope for the best. So this is kind of tragic. But for 7,000 years, we were fine. And way up in the Ottawa River Valley, up in northern Ottawa, they had all these people with very, very high civilization there, if you want to, just technologically advanced and astute, and they built canoes for the first time and started carrying them. And Micmac, a relative of mine, Todd Labrador, built this one, and student of William Commando, so there's still a few. So then that led to the birth of the portage route, which is my pet It's a pet project of mine, and one of my favorite topics. I am not strong enough to do solo portaging, but I do canoe. But when I look at maps, and you can see that Mother Earth has given us these certain alignments of rivers where we can go one to another. And usually you get one, the two different river systems, and you're able to connect them, and it's a big deal. But the thing is, what's amazing is White Plains has 8, and they go in different directions. It's really a one in a million city. So going back to what I was talking about, this is a map of the old copper culture in the Ottawa River Valley. So there's Lake Huron. Again, you may be familiar. This is Manitoulin Island, Georgian Bay. But this is Lake Huron, and Detroit's down here. And then here's Lake Michigan, and Chicago's down here. There's a town called Oconto, which flourished 4000 BC. And then here's Copper Harbor, which has lots of natural copper. That's the Lake Superior copper you've heard about maybe. And here's Isle Royal, where there's this very high civilization. Sault Ste. Marie, a great way to ruin your canoe, I guess, but it's a good rapids. Here's the whole Ottawa River, and again, all this is 4500 BC, and these are various Native American communities that still exist. So the Ottawa River goes up here, and there's the, can't remember the city, goes back towards Ottawa town, and there's Lake Ontario. So what happened was they were somewhat isolated, but they developed this language that we're going to be studying today in class, and it came down. So it's interesting how it came down. So here's Ticonderoga. So this was kind of how people in this region way up there managed to get down here. So here is, that wasn't good. Okay, so you're thrown back. So here is the Hudson River, and then it makes a sharp turn here, and then there's a portage route of just 2-3 miles here in red, and then you're connected to Lake George, and then to Ticonderoga, and so forth and so on, and that takes you back to the Great Lakes. So here is a close-up of Ticonderoga. You see there's this La Chute is a waterway, but it's now also a road, and here's Montcalm Road in red. Here's 9N, if you've ever been there, and here's Lake George. So this is the area where all these waterways connect, and as you see from the other map, that the Hudson's nearby. So this is sort of like your, that rotary in the middle of town where everything connects, and that's how they started out way up in Ottawa in the Great Lakes. And they had portages up there too. They were there, of course, a long time. Way before the Egyptians, they beat the Egyptians on the use of copper by 1,000 years. And yet then the Egyptians found tin, and they catapulted them into the Bronze Age. And we were left behind. But anyway, you can read the type here. But this is, there's a lot of roadways that were portages. Okay, so it wasn't long before this portage method reached the Hudson Valley, and for thousands more years, the Bronx River connected canoers to many portage routes and to other rivers. And maybe the most important of all was at Quoropus, White Plains. So this is a remarkable thing, but look at this. Here's East Post Road, that one. Here's Main Street. It almost pretty much crosses. Here's the Bronx River, here's the swampy area, here's the field of Quoropus, and they all kind of go places, right, to the Mamaroneck. Now this part of the Mamaroneck was called the Paqueteswake, which it's also called Mamaroneck. Both are native words, but Paqueteswake refers to the beautiful flat area that it flows peacefully through. So here's Hamilton Avenue and Lake, and that may have been an earlier portage route because it connects two gigantic commuter routes, the Bronx River, which was Aquahong, with Mamaroneck, which was called that, and of course, Paqueteswake. And so they could carry, I don't know, I don't remember exactly, on another slide you'll see the exact measurement, but it's less than 2 miles, I think. And so that's reasonable. So here's Route 22. Now Route 22, the old post road here, but Route 22 is the Tulpehoken Trail. And it goes from Montreal, where there's an island and a mountain and water and a portage. And it goes from there, and there's waterfalls. And it goes along down to New York City, what's now, or Manhattan in those days. And then it cuts west and goes to Louisville. And it goes to an island in the Ohio River called Corn Island, which is now Shippensport Island, but it's a very, very important spot, and that's where it ends. So this is the Tulpehoken Trail because it flows along the back of the turtle, and you know all about the turtle, right? That we're on the back of a turtle, and that's why it curves on the horizon, right? And that's Tulpe. So this is, I think, my favorite slide, actually. So you can kind of imagine how somebody would, like, you do anything, right? So they say that, these canoers would do anything possible to get from one river system to another, because it means you can go twice as far. And as they would say, the impossible will take them a little longer, So, and it's true, they will do crazy things. So here we go. This is the big map. It's a little hard to digest, but I just want to show it to you to get the big picture. This is Wisquaqua, which is Dobbs Ferry. This was like a capital of the Wecqueesquick people, and its name, Wecqueesquick, is named after this river here, the Wickers Creek, which is a play on words in English. Clever, huh? Wickers Creek, Wecqueesquick. But it describes this river that We is like the head, and then Quay is shallow water, and Keck is prominent. And it goes right up to Route 9. I'm going to show you a picture of that later. But then there's all these rivers. As you're going along Ardsley Avenue, which is this portage route, you hit like most of the 7 rivers, just very close to each other. And each of them basically goes to a different place, which is ideal. And there's no place I've ever seen on Earth quite like it. And then, so you're all special, So this is the Bronx River. I highlighted it in blue. So you can see it's central to the whole thing. And there's a ridge here. And the ridge has a road called the Common Path on top of it. You can hear me when I turn my back, right? So this is the Common Path, Route 22. And there's a beautiful saying that when a drop of rain falls on this path, that it'll either fall to the left or to the right. It'll either roll to the west or to the east, and you don't know where it's going to go. But the people would identify themselves according to that, so that the people on the west would identify with the raindrop that flows into the Hudson, and the people on the east would identify with the raindrop that flows into the Sound and to the Atlantic Ocean. And they're, proud of that. But the thing is, of course, it's random. You don't know which way it's going to go. But that's part of the way they saw themselves. And by the way, the people on the east tended to have more wampum. So they were a little bit, kind of look down at the others a little bit. But this pathway is the borderland between the Siwanoy over here, and Siwanoy means, Siwan or wampum, but Siwanoy means also salt water, and it has many different meanings, all related to each other. Also, they say from the south, they say maybe they came from the south. But this line is the boundary line, but the Bronx River is right next to it in parallel, and so that's in this Wecqueesquick area. But of course, they have access to it on both sides. So the Siwanoy were a very large and powerful group. But then, so were the Wecqueesquick, and they said, it's interesting, they were the ones that really had the best access to all these waterways, and it was said in the colonial times that, boy, those Wecqueesquick get around fast, They had a large area that they were in charge of, administratively speaking, as sachems, and anything that happened, they'd show up immediately. And people say, how did they do that? Well, first of all, they're on the Hudson, but the other thing is they have access to these amazing portage routes. So this is, remember that everyone lived on a river. Everyone lived within 50 feet of a river because, like I say, I go to these schools and I fill a bucket with water and I say, hey kid, you want to volunteer? Yeah, okay. Pick up that bucket. And he picks the bucket. I said, well, that's great. Is it heavy? No. And then I just wait. I said, keep holding it. And I'll give my dog, is it heavy yet? It's getting a little heavy. And then after a while, he says, yeah, it's too heavy. Okay, put it down. Well, the point is that when you live more than 50 feet from water, you're going to have to carry it a long way, and you're going to really be tired of it, of all the carrying, because water's heavy. So they would live near water, and even the rock shelters, they'd live in ones that were near water. So these are some of the places. And these are the people you could visit just by using the portages. And this is southern Westchester. There's even more. And you probably can't make it out, but you know, all these trails in black have names and various Native American names. So here comes the $64 question, right? What is a Choropus? Well, how many people knew that White Plains was called Choropus? Okay, a few. Okay, well, the rest of you, we're going to learn you up here, because, yeah, there's a street, right? How many people have ever heard of Choropus Avenue? Okay, see, now we're talking. Okay, you probably wondered why they call that. Well, it's in an important spot, isn't it? That's where some of the Board of Elections are in Choropus. So, okay, so these are in this next several frames, and this is the hard part. But somebody, and I think it was probably maybe Tracy, said, hey, why don't you do a list of Algonquin place names and translate them? I said, all right, baby, let's do it. Okay, but it's a big chunk. So these are some of those place names, not all of them, but they were used at the time of contact with the Europeans, and that was, say, 1524 to 1776, and then it gets, the United States after that. Many of the Aboriginal Algonquin place names in Westchester, are still used, but some of them have been word played almost out of existence by the Dutch, like Wickers Creek, very clever, thank you, and later by the English. Others are only used marginally today as names for streets and parks. You do see that. There's a Seaway golf course, To me, that's good, but it's getting started, but it's not good enough. So let's have parks and, whole cities names. Today we'll discuss those that have fallen out of use, and I suggest they be restored, maybe partially restored as subtitles on road signs, which many states and cities around the U.S. have started to do. In each case, I propose either the best known, which I symbolize by the letters BK, or the most common sense solution, CS, to the interpretations, which would be based on syllable by syllable meaning. And so I hope I don't get too much trouble with that. And if you don't know, Choropus was the original name of White Plains. So let's start. I hope you can read some of this, but I'll read it. And it's alphabetical. Okay, one of my favorites is at the top. Alip-Conk. That's Terrytown. Alip-Conk. There's a pronunciation guide. It means hills of elm trees. So Alip is elm trees and Conk is hills, plural. And the area in question is on the south end of town. And a native village was described there in settlers in 1659. And even today, I bet there's a 2-foot deep shell midden underneath the ground. This was found and dug up. So the word Tarrytown there is from Taraway town, or Taraway is wheat. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. A wheat town, not native. So Amawak is actually from Warramog. I know it doesn't sound like that, but it means a good fishing place, and many sources agree on that, so I say it's best knowledge. Wara is good and Mog is the best. So it doesn't even say fishing, but that must have dropped the syllable. But there's also an Amawapiners Nation. So Aquahung is what we're all here to talk about. That's the Bronx River, or Aquahung. Now Aquahung means steep banks, river of a high bluff, and you can navigate according to Mr. DeVillo. I think he said 219th Street, and it's 23 miles long, fresh all the way down to West Farms, near the Bronx Zoo. So that my source is Steve DeVillo, and he can refute that if he wants to, but that's what I wrote. Okay, and Aquinonk is the Hutchinson River, a very important river for portage. It means high banks, implying red cedar trees. So the Hutchinson River I'm going to mention several times because it's really important. It's south of here. It's pretty far south, but you can connect to it portaging from the Bronx River easily, and it goes out to the Sound, where it goes out to wampum factory. And so later going to learn that the Mohawks came all the way down from Mohawk River and were able to navigate the backwaters of Westchester to get to all three wampum factories. We can talk about that. Armenparol refers to some type of fish, and hard to say. Armensperhain is a word from which the word sprain probably came from, and that's a type of fish, but it's hard to be sure. It may be a cod. Aramonk is a good fishing place. That's acknowledged. Apawamis is the word for Harrison, New York, and that it means birch bark. That was a lesser-known group of Siouanoi branch of the Wappingers Confederacy. Byram River, that's English. It's probably from to buy rum, maybe. There's never been a better explanation. But it's also called the Amawak River, so we know what the real name is. Kandatoa, no real translation, but it was near Lewisboro. It was a Paugussett village. Chappaqua, a separate place, which is generally known. The people here were within the Wappingers Confederacy, but no chief and no representation, so we're literally separate. So other neighboring chiefs would have to negotiate treaties for them. And it's a little unusual, but they're right in the middle of this whole, Sint-Sink, I think, group. Konangung Hill, it means river crossing, a Quinnipiac village in the Bronx River. Probably the origin of the word gun hill, because I don't think they had guns growing up out of the ground. But ku means near, water is there near water. An is a pathway, and kung is the hill, so it seems pretty clear. So grassy sprain. The Dutch word for hand spreading seeds, spreiden, to spread, and it's possible that sprain comes from spreiden, but it also comes from the fish. So sometimes you have two possible origins of a word. So Katona is the most tricky one. There was a chief Katona, but probably Cloten, he contends, and then changed by the playful Dutch to Groosknoten, which your Dutch means a big knot in your hair. And so then they called him wind in his hair, which is very romantic, some out of Dances with Wolves. But that became Croton, which is a place after Italy. So you see there's this feverish desire to play with these words, to remember them. And Katona is probably the best or worst. Kensico, sounds like a corporation, but it's not. It was the name of Chief Kokenseko, and he sold a lot of White Plains area by treaty. So Kensico Dam is in honor of him. Now, the Kitchewan, that's a real serious Algonquin word. That's for Croton, the point, town, and river, could all be called Kitchewan. And Kitchewan is clear. Kitche is great, and Wan is a tributary, or river, that flows into another one. Croton is, again, from the east coast of Italy. Laphawaking, that's the name of a wampum factory, wampum stringing place, and the Hutchinson leads to it. But the thing is that I believe that, some places have been described or translated as planting place when, in fact, that word doesn't mean that. But this word does mean planting place. So Mamaroneck, and that's a village that was near the Sound. It was Siouanois. It's tricky, but Mama could be hunting land, and Mawa could be gathering place. Either or, we don't know. But Ran is a dialect for the tributary, and Neck or Nok is the mouth of the river, which, of course, that's where the Mamaroneck comes out at that harbor and flows fresh into salty. Because it's a tributary, you assume it's fresh. It falls into the bay, which is going to be salty. So it's often translated as fresh water falling into salty, but that's not literal, but it ends up and amounts to that. So that's an important one. Mina is the word for Indian point, and that's oysters. So that's where they gathered oysters. Mohican, of course, is a large tribal group, kind of like we're uncles with Mohicans. And there's the Mohican Trail, which is Route 9. And Maul means the greatest of all. Hikan is an arm of the sea, or an estuary. And Ituk is a river that flows both ways, in the sense that not all estuaries are. So they're the people, and the Mohican Trail is Route 9 is named the Mohican Trail by all kinds of people. I did a lot to try to popularize it. Now, one of my favorites is Neperhan, which is the word for Sawkill Creek. You know, Neperhan Avenue, you probably thought it was English, right? It's not English, it's Algonquin. Neperhan is a fish trap creek, as many have noted. The fish traps are at the short waterfall and the Stony waterfall, where the Sawkill flows into the Hudson right near the Yonkers train station. Has anybody seen that? It's kind of a strange shape. It flows around. And so nepe is fish, meaning you eat it every day. But of course, han is tributary. And there's a village with a similar name, Neperhan, that was in the park. I can't remember the name of the park. Starts with an U. Do you remember it? Oh, yes, Untermeyer Park. Thank you. Untermeyer Park was a village, and there was a similar name, Neperhan. Oparamac is the word for the Sprain Brook, and Oparamac is a fish. And again, they're likely to be cod, although I've wondered about if it was eel, but generally cod, and if anybody fishes it and knows what to catch in it, let me know. But I think it's cod. Pakitaswake, as I mentioned, a section of the Merrimack. So Wa is beautiful, peaceful, Ki is land, and this section of the river passes calmly across the flat open area, according to what I'm understanding. Now there's Paquatuck, which is Peekskill Creek. Paquatuck. Pach is flat, Qua is shallow, and Tuck is a tidal river. And so, by the way, the Peekskill Hollow Road, which is a very nice drive, was the Paquatuck Trail. So we're getting up to the P's now. Peekskill, probably after the Dutch trader Peek, but Peek is also a body of water. Peekskill Creek was called Paquatuck. Poningo is challenging. Poningo, Po could be a big rock, and Ing is a place, Ko by the water, but actually there's an N there. So I'm thinking, again, there's no official satisfying translation. So pon could mean potato, but I have to find out anybody has ever grown potatoes there. But that's what it says. So Coropus, okay, so here's what we've all been waiting for. The moment is Coropus. What does it mean? It means, well, does mean White Plains, spelled different ways. Now here is from the History of Westchester by Mr. Bolton II in Volume 2, where the fields shine white with dew in the morning sunrise. That's my kind of interpretation of what it means. And White Marsh, as Steve DeVella has commented, that's true. Shephem was a chief, one of the sachems of the place, conjointly selling land there to the inhabitants of the town of Rye in 1663. It is so long since the Indians quitted these grounds that their monuments are almost effaced, and their wigwams and the cemetery where they buried their dead are in the center of town. And there is a mortar where they pounded corn. So he's lamenting that these things are in disrepair, but did you know there were corn mortars and engraved monuments of Native American origin in the middle of White Plains? I think that's interesting. And again, lamenting that they're in disrepair. Well, if they're there, I want to see them. So Quinahong is Hunt's Point, a planting area according to Steve, and that may be, but Quine means long, and Hong is a high place with high banks. And again, that was also written up in Wikipedia, but I don't generally go to Wikipedia as a source unless there's anything else. Rippawam is a Siwanoy tribe, and Chief Ponus was the chief, and near Greenwich. Sakhos in the Peekskill area where the water flows out, and there are natives still today who were originally in the Sakhos area where the water flows out down there, and they moved up the Peekskill Creek over centuries, and now they're way up almost in Putnam County, kind of living in the mountains there. And I want to remind you that the Wappingers people are called Hoagland people, or Hoagland Highland people, by the Dutch for a good reason, because even today there's a tendency for the descendants to live in very high places that not a lot of people would. So then there's the Sakara path, a Sachem's path, Sachem, and then on for path. This is Route 1 between Gun Hill and New Rochelle, just that section. Shipon is a village near Rye, but also all of Stanford. It means set apart. Sheldrake the name lost, but it's an important part of the portage system. Sinasqua is one of my favorite. Croton Point. Sinasqua. Sin is stones, as is oysters or shellfish, and qua is shallow water. So when I first went there, I was being driven by an archaeologist, and I looked at the big street sign. I said, "Excuse me, is there a giant rock that's actually made out of a lot of clamshells near shallow water?" He said, "Yeah, what are you, psychic?" I said, "No, there's a big sign." It said Sinasqua. So then he got interested in the Algonquin language, but it was, he had measured that. That's at Sinasqua Bay, but it's like very shallow there, part of the Hudson, and there's this whole big rock that's just compacted oyster shells and very solid. It's a good name. Sint and sink. Sint is stones and us is small place of the small stones. So it's very easy. When you go to that, there's a riverbed that comes out from the train station just north of there, and there's all these little potato-like rocks. They're all the same size, and they're all lying there. And there's some water, but not a lot on a summer day. But it has all these small stones, just like slightly smaller than baseballs. And this is the last page, and you go, whew. Siwanoy, the whole eastern half of Westchester. Siwan for wampum, away they are. Shawan, meaning people from the south. And, there were people from the south. There was a lot of trade with the Taino from Puerto Rico. Over thousands of years, I can tell you a lot of stories. It comes up a lot, for me, at least in my research. Snackapins is the wampum factory, and at the mouth of the Bronx River, at what we call Claflin's Point. That was named after a family of very early settlers who were friends with Kieft. And so they got all this land called Claflin's Point. But the word means land between two waters. According to Steve DeVillo, I took notes in the last talk, and I think that's right. Tintagis. Okay, the spelling is funny, but I want to share with you this. The pronunciation was shared with me by the last chief of the Tintagis, Mike D'Amico. He said, it's Tintagis. Tell everybody. Everybody gets it wrong. And it means forest dwellers. And they moved north from the shoreline down on the Sound. They kept moving north through Westchester to almost all these different towns have saying, well, the Tintagis lived here. Well, no, they lived there and there and there. They moved to Patterson, and that was last they were, had a village. Tuckahoe, I'm sure you all heard all kinds of reasons, explanations of Tuckahoe, but I can tell you that this village bordering the Bronx River means a root that is good to eat. And that's what the language says. This refers to Indian turnip, which you know as Jack in the Pulpit. And there's lots of them down there on the banks of the Bronx River, and the Tuckahoe River has an edible root that grows on the banks of the Bronx and the other rivers. So, and I understand this was a marble quarry, but the point is that they had special preparations. In the old days, there wasn't that much to eat, so you had something you could actually eat, and you'd go through various preparations, because it's a little peppery, right? But there's an edible root at the bottom of the Jack in the Pulpit, Tuckahoe. Now, sometimes you might see it translated as mushrooms, and in other areas of the country. So I think it's in a totally different language. Tulpehoken Trail, I mentioned that. I'll skip that. Wekwisky, okay? Wekwisky, diverse opinions, but we means head, clearly in Algonquin. Kwe is a shallow inlet that was borrowed by the English, I believe. And us is small, and Keck is a prominent place. So this describes the terrain at Wickers Creek at Dobbs Ferry. And I'll show you pictures, but the water goes uphill, and there's waterfalls, and it goes right up to Route 9, and then there's this kind of a bigger waterfall, and then the rest of it's underneath the cement. But it fits. And that was also called Wisquaqua, which was the village name in Dobbs Ferry. Whisk means to the west, qua is again shallow water, and wan is far away. So the words and the K's all fit together, they overlap. So it's to the shallow water far away to the west. Now this has to do with the story that I'll share with you. One of the first things I read when studying the history of this area is that the chiefs of White Plains knew they had something in terms of portages, and the Mohawks heard about it, and after meeting with the Dutch, they realized they needed a lot of wampum, and so they made a deal. And they wanted access to all these waterways through White Plains, And so the chief said to his own people, the Corupa, said, let's all go to Wisquaqua, because there's all this beautiful land and there's corn. And the word Wisquaqua has layers and layers of meaning, including the beautiful cornfields to the west and so forth and so on, but also just plainly is shallow water far away to the west. So people moved from White Plains and they settled in Dobbs Ferry and became the capital of the Wecqueesgeeks. Yonkers is a little confusing. I'll share it with you. Of course, Yonkers, it means youngsters in Dutch, but many Native Americans feel that it refers to the Madawack, which they translate as youngsters also on Long Island. And that may refer to the Taino navigators who came to Long Island around 1380, and they were newcomers, and they decided to stay, but of course they lacked seniority, so they were constantly being teased, right, as youngsters. So I've heard this from various elders from Long Island, but the thing is, that Matoak is also a Taino word meaning people of the dawn, which fits our local translations. It's a little complicated, but Chief Pennakeek was quoted as saying that these Wecqueesgeeks of Yonkers moved to Newark, now New Jersey, and called it Wequahic, and they became known as Raretans, which means Goods River, because they were mean people coming around, and he didn't say who they were. But that area of excuse me, that area of the Newark is still called Wequahic, and there's a park, and everything's named Wequahic, and that's a variation on Wecqueesgeek. Now, Wappingers, of course, the whole confederacy is Wappingers, and that's a little complicated, but it's the main confederacy. Wap means east, dawn land, ing is a place, and Wap could also be a white-faced, small white face, a word for possum, and also, on another level, he has no fur in his tail, which is possum. And so the Wappingers icon, their national totem, is a possum. But also there's an owl and a tree frog, and we'll go into that later. Someday you can ask me. Wickagill is a word you may hear, and this is the most mysterious. It's a subdivision of Siwanac territory, but there's no actual tribe or village of Wickagill that I know of. But it stretches from Norwalk to Hellgate, and it was some kind of treaty territory for the Dutch. So it's not a native Algonquin word, and there's no nation. But the thing is that there's a kind of a weird translation in Dutch, which means the camp or territory where you yell. It's just, I think it's probably some other language. So let's talk about this. I'm not going to go through all these, but I've got all the rivers here, and it's on your handout. So I'm going to leave that to you. But this is the Northern Westchester group, and it has all Crawbucky and Cross River. So then, okay, in summary, the 7 rivers of White Plains, plus the 8th one. We have the Hudson, or Mohicanituck. We have Wickers Creek, Wecqueesgeek. We have the Sawmill, which is Neprahan. We have Sprain Brook, which is Oparamac. We have Bronx River, which is Aquahung. We have Sheldrake, which is Sheldrake, and Mamaroneck, which is Pocketaswati, and other names. And then the 8th river is Hutchinson, which is Aquanunk. So these are all right here, and there's no place else that I know of that has so many rivers. And the thing is that they're separate and they go somewhere. So the 8th river, of course, is the Mohawks, and I talked about that agreement the Mohawks made. So it apparently did happen. These people, the Quaropas, went west, and the Mohawks started using this. And I'm going to show you some maps of that and how they fostered this great trading enterprise by having access to 3 different wampum factories. So this is, did it for a Kisco group of Boy Scouts, by the way. This is an amazing map, and I'll show you, it's a little complicated at first, but these are ridges that separate one watershed from another. Of course, when you have watershed, you have to have ridges, the watershed ridge to contain them. So this is a big one here, and you have Sisqua on this side and Kitona on this side. And then it crosses another ridge, another kind of watershed ridge here at this point. And so in this quadrant, you have Byron Lake And this is the origin of the Bronx River in this waterway. And over here you have the Wampus, you have Kitchewan coming down here, and then you have Sisquoia here, and then you have Portage, and that leads to Wampus River, which another portage leads you to the Bronx River, and then the rest you're probably familiar with. So that's this one quadrant. Now this quadrant here is the Mianus River watershed, and here's Mianus River here, and it turns around, goes up against that ridge and turns back down, and goes to the Atlantic. Very different than the Bronx, which goes to the Sound. So then you go in this quadrant, and you lead back, rolling north to the Kitchewan, and to the Muscoot here, to the Hudson. And then here, and this quadrant, you see here's the quadrant, and this is Bedford, and so you have all these different rivers. There are several different portages here and here and here, which makes this area a prime portage area. And so you have one right here, right where the big church is. There's a big church in the middle of Bedford. I think, you know, it's Patrick, or anyway, it's right, it's right in front of the church. It's still there. But Sisquoia they misinterpreted the C as a K, right? We don't have that problem. But it's Kisco is really Cisco, which means muddy. And so that's an amazing kind of nexus of all these. Just what's the mileage? I think this is a circle, maybe it's 5 miles around Kisco. And all that, almost all those connections are within that circle of 5 miles. So that's why I was saying it's very abundant. And here you see this is going south. From there, you have the Croton River in the upper part. You have the Wampus River. I'll show you. Wampus River coming down. Wampus, you know, it's a small pond with a stream. And here's the portage between the spring of the Wampus River and the spring of the Bronx here. That's not even a mile. And then you go down here, and here we are, Coropus, and all these different connections. Okay, so when you're looking further south, this is Sewanway, and this is about the 8th river. Okay, this river here is the Hutchinson, and you see how it's a little bit further from White Plains, but it connects with this little portage here with the Bronx River, and then goes out to these wampum factories and to the Sound. And the Sound is where, you know, the wampum comes from over here, and in Long Island mostly, and then they carry it across the Sound, and then they set up these wampum factories at Snackapins, and here at Laco Joaquin, and then Mannersing. These are the 3 wampum factories. And by factory, it just means the Dutch use that word because they're stringing them together. And they're also carving them, which is very hard. So it takes a lot of man hours. So the Bronx River, so here you go all the way from the Kitchewan, they come down the Mohawk, down the Hudson River, over to the Kitchewan, down the Wampus, and fairly easily get to the Bronx, and then they get that little portage down to the Hutch here, or straight on down towards Manhattan. Okay, so again, where did the wampum come from? Well, I'm gonna be brief on this, but you see that Long Island is here, and we're here, and so you have it coming out, and those factories are here, and here's where the wampum's coming from, right there. And so in this square, it's a little technical, but near 25A, colonists, 1938 there was a study, and they found all these different sources, and some of the wampum shells were still lying on the ground. And here again, this is my big map of all those around Coropus, and it's just, you know, you could probably spend an hour just browsing through and imagining yourself portaging and rowing through all these different streams, and it's actually a pretty exciting thing. So they're all there. Okay, so here you have the Sprain Brook here, and you take the Ardsley, and then there's like Sawmill and Sprain Brook and Grassley Spring and Bronx River and so forth, and they connect. But they also not only connecting across, but you can travel down them and make other connections to other places as well. So I'm going to be brief with this. This is to show you, recent times, what's happened to that Main Street, to that Hamilton Street portage route. It's been built over since the late 1900s, 1800s. Okay, so again, here's a map of the Great Corpus Portage. So I think we've seen this, but maybe now the significance is greater to you. And if you look at this, there's a sign that shows you the portage. Only it doesn't tell you that. It tells you, well, this is where the battle was, and this is where everybody lined up. And guess what? They knew exactly what they were doing. And Washington, I think, was protecting the portage, among other things. And then, it was a stalemate of the battle, but one of the things was the British didn't stay. And I want to add an interesting irony that, Daniel Ninham, who was the chief of the Wappingers, was in Cortland's Ridge battle, and he died in that battle. But some people seriously feel that he was defending George Washington's position at White Plains, because on the same day that he died, defending the dragoons, George Washington was in White Plains, and we know it because he wrote 4 letters, important letters, and dated them that day to his generals. So I think that's part of it. So on these maps, if you go back out to these spots of Chatterton Hill, you can kind of see these portage routes implied or stated boldly in these maps. And Washington's troops were along that, also later on along the Ardsley route. So again, you can see that here, and again, maybe you want to check this film out and can take a better look. So present era, these are pictures. I think are fun. This won't take long, but these are navigable portages around White Plains. Left is Mamaroneck Creek in White Plains, and on the right is Silver Lake, which is part of the upper Mamaroneck, near the Harrison border. This is, of course, the Bronx River, and it's fed by Davis Brook or Golden Pine under Water Street, which joins it at the train station, also by Tompkins Brook. So these feed the river and keep the levels higher. And if we wanted them to be even higher, there are things that could be done to help people today, traverse them. If daylighted, Davis Brook at Water Street might add not only charm, but an incentive for ecotourists. They could arrive by train and then begin boating all around White Plains. And this shallows deserves attention. And the question is it better to remove a few of these stones or to raise the water level by opening city water department sluices at Reservoir 2? Just an idea. But anyway, Tompkins Brook flows more water into the Bronx River at White Plains Cemetery. So these are all ideas, and you see the ducks have enough draw, but some canoes would not. So you're looking at this as a potential commuter recreational waterway that lots of people would use. It's very high potential. There's just a couple of spots. And of course here you have a big waterfall, but it's not as bad as you think. So a little patch of paradise between Popham Avenue and Drake, which is nearby, but there's a very easy portage walk around right around there. And what if Ashburn, Ardsley, Popham Avenues were renamed Portage Way? And then they'd get the idea. All one trail, by the way. So look at this. On this over here, I'm not getting it. This is an easy walk around. There's a path already there, and just bring it around to here, and then you've gotten around the waterfall. And here is the common path I mentioned. It's still there. You see Post Road, Topiahoken Trail, Montreal to Louisville, and there it is. Still called the Post Road as it was during the Revolution, and it's Route 22. Sheldrake Creek is an important part of the chain and source near Hartsdale Avenue, but there's something called a kayak which might be able to get through it, but also there's an SUP. If you remove the keel and you're able to keep your balance, then maybe you could go even through the shallowest areas in the summer. But that's something I hope many people will start to research. How do you go through some of the shallower areas? Golden Horseshoe Mall, by the way, is near one of these spots. So it could be valuable in terms of commuting if we could find the right vehicle. SUPs are good. So here you see what I was showing you. I'm going to skip that. But here's you go further on the Ardsley or Ashburton Trail, past Dobbs, before Dobbs Ferry, and you come to this source of the Sprainbrook, which is very beautiful. And you see that this is it's almost like Disneyland. You know how there's canoe routes in Disneyland? Here we have one that's already made up, and here's another view. And here's this butterfly goldfinch garden next to these headwaters of the Sprain. And of course, there's lots of little customers there. You can't see them in the photo. But it's a very beautiful area, and that's a commuter route that we could use. This is Sprainbrook, but looking north, and this little snaky thing here, pretty much, after that, it's very hard to get any further, but going downstream from there, it's quite extensive. And I guess the thing is, of course, this is fossil fuel-free commuter routes. And this is the bridge where you see White Plains and Dobbs Ferry connected. There's a lot of potential as part of the commuter route. This is the sawmill, very beautiful. This part here just needs a little trimming, and it would be perfect for, leisurely canoeing. It's very flat and level. This is part of it. The sawmill or Nepperhan above 119, but it's below 287, but it's within sight of both. But you have one of the best areas here. It's already the shoreline is already stoned in, but this connects a lot of portages. And here's the sawmill or Nepperhan in Yonkers, and just beyond the train station there's a statue of Ella Fitzgerald, and the Hudson River is beyond that. And these were daylighted after I wrote about it in Native New Yorkers, and I made several speeches in Yonkers, and they listened to other people. And I talked about the lost waterways of the Algonquins, and then they went into action and they daylighted this whole section, and right beyond there is the fish trapping place, which goes into the Hudson. But Chicken Island was an important island to the Algonquins for rendezvous. It is yet to be daylighted. And so there's the Dobbs Ferry Road, very important. I'm going to skip over that. Sawmill is here. And there's this flood control problem. Wickers Creek. Okay, so you see this big highway flat place area here. Well, actually underneath is important features of Wickers Creek. And so that's the original Mohican Trail, too. Washington established a headquarters near the stream. It led to a ferry crossing in the west and a portage trail. So Dobbs Ferry was an actual ferry where the Dobbs family took some of those dugouts and liberated them and used them for themselves. They used the same route. So, should be fine. Okay. So here's some pictures of Wickers Creek. And they had actually, there's the aqueduct, and there's the bridge about as far on the right there, as far as you can go up Wickers Creek, because they actually was a wicker fish trap there the natives used, and it goes in a particular place where the fish are going up this steep rocky stream, and then you trap them with the wicker trap, and then you have your fish. So that's an ideal place for a wicker trap, hence Wickers Creek. And then, of course, 1781, the revolutionaries crossed the Dobbs Ferry to go to Yorktown. So it's historically important. This is Wickers Creek today on the right. Far down, it still can carry some water and some travel. So I'll do this as soon as I can. But this is the whole environmental breakthrough here, the possible future of White Plains. And let me go ahead here. You probably know this. Why go fossil fuel free? Well, there's a lot of problems with gasoline. Even though we've been going 100 years or more with it, there are still problems. And there's all these different kind of boats, including foldable boats. But the problem is, how does one person carry a boat from one of these valleys to another? Well, there's various modern solutions to help it actually be easier. Like, for example, you have kayaks, right? All kinds, and the prices are very reasonable. And some of them can be rolled up into backpacks. Some of them weigh 30 pounds, which is manageable, maybe 20. And some are actually 40, but they're manageable rolled up. And some of them, like on the upper left, that's a hard kayak that doesn't fold, and some of them also do fold. And here is the standby. These are birch bark canoes. The one on the upper right weighs only 45 pounds, and it's a 14-foot. One would weigh 50 pounds. And on the left, they're heavier. These are for the girls' canoe. and it's $119. Affordable, but it's probably gone up now. And this Old Town is a classic, the Discovery, 65 pounds. So we're seeing this is within most people's reach, both economically and in terms of weight. I don't know about me, but here's more of these kayaks. Each has pros and cons, so you should study carefully. And, oh, I've been doing backwards. I know, it looks familiar. Okay, so there's very innovative boats. Water bikes could work on even the shallowest rivers here. And then there's the SUPs, which I think are very interesting. There's a little bit of a draw with the you have the fin, but you could do a lot with this on some of these little streams that we have. And also coin up in the lower right, you could have coin up SUPs and other kayaks. You know, some people are doing that in some towns in Beacon. So here's the one I mentioned in the beginning, and this is a custom amphibious vehicle. You can't carry it, but you could pedal it over the hills between one of these rivers and the other. So I call it the White Plains Water Wagon. And the WPWW has a seat and pedals on the trike wheels. Paddles on the wheels for a short portage. And a tow rope, so worst case you could actually tow it up a steep hill with a yoke. And you could get there and back. The best feature is the bike wheels with paddles. It has larger balloon-like tires with a smoother ride over the stones. And so that's, okay, and these are from China. The Alibaba is very successful. All kinds of different products. And this is in Beacon. Everybody could get to take their kayak here for free. And then I think that's going to be it. So there are many, many great portage routes around the country. And American cities were built around these portages. And these portages are gifts from Mother Earth, where two watersheds come close together so that paddlers can carry their canoes from one river to the other. And White Plains hosts 8 different water routes. The Bronx River is the link between them all, and could it lead the way, maybe, to a revitalized fossil-free transportation system? Think about it. And that's my time. Thank you very much. Awesome.
Okay, comment on the question?
That was awesome. Amelia Zaino was born in the Bronx and is now living in Mount Vernon. She is a lover of all things outdoors and local. She worked at the Bartow Pell Mansion Museum, the New York City H2O, and is currently the education coordinator at the Bronx River Alliance. In her spare time, you can find her on Instagram sharing fascinating historic snippets about Mount Vernon and the Northeast Bronx. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies from Fordham University and a Master of Science in Geographic Information Science from CUNY Lehman College.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful time. I know I am. I just learned so much from that presentation. I had heard a phrase once that geography is destiny, and that presentation just solidifies that. It is so true. Our cities are the way they are because of the way nature shapes them. And nature designs things with purpose. And as we're going to talk about in my presentation today is how humans thought they could alter that and therefore spoiled the landscape that the Algonquin people were able to enjoy and utilize and share. And I want to highlight the key word there, share. For example, the common path, it was a shared path. Unfortunately, as time went by, we lost sight of what it meant to share things. So I'm going to talk about ecological restoration on the Bronx River. Again, my name is Amelia Zaino. I am substituting for my colleague Christian Murphy. So I think you guys know this, but just in case anybody needs a refresher, the Bronx River is about 23 miles long, starts all the way in Valhalla, and ends at the East River. Something that I tell my students, I teach, East River is not actually a river. It's an estuary. Tell a bunch of 8-year-olds this, their minds are blown. And the Bronx River is a freshwater river from its origin in Valhalla all the way down till about East Tremont Avenue. At East Tremont Avenue, it mixes with the tidal flow coming in from the East River. So, true or false question. Get ready to raise your hands. Here's the statement first. The Bronx River was the first source considered for New York City's drinking water in 1799. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Very good, yeah. The Bronx River was actually going to be the drinking water source for what was then Manhattan. However, it was deemed to not be enough water, and that's why the engineers decided to look to the Croton system instead. But yes, there once was a time when the Bronx River's water was so pristine and so clean that you could drink straight from it. And we can still see some remnants of what a pristine Bronx River looks like today. For example, at the Bronx River Gorge at the New York Botanical Garden and the Bronx River Forest. For most of the Bronx River's length, it runs through a low, soft valley made of marble. We learned earlier about the marble quarry at Tuckahoe. The Bronx River's valley is very low and very soft. However, there are some parts that are rocky, especially as we go back into the Bronx. And areas that are really rocky, really hilly, kind of a pain in the neck to develop, were able to be retained and preserved as parks. That's one of the reasons why Bronx Park is able to have such a beautiful forest standing, is because nobody really wanted to turn that into anything else. We got a little lucky. The same holds true for Seton Falls Park in the Northeast Bronx. However, the parts of the Bronx River that were flat and convenient were quickly exploited for industrial uses. Even in colonial times, we see the Bronx River dammed in order to power several mills. There were dams at today's Bronx Zoo, Botanical Garden, Bronxville, and that's only naming a few. We might be here till 10 o'clock if I named every single dam along the Bronx River. And then, shortly after that, we get the New York Central Railroad, which is today's Metro-North Railroad Harlem Line. That starts to change the landscape of the Bronx River area. Because of the railroad, we see two important ecological changes. One, the river is forced to be straightened to make it easier for the railroad. We call that channelization, when we alter a river to make it easier for people. Another issue with the railroad is, of course, this is the 19th century, capitalism is booming, and people said, well, we could put ads along the railroad track. So lots of forested land was cut down in order to put gigantic billboards facing the New York Central Railroad, so passengers could look at the newest ad for, I don't know, tinned meat or something. And then in the South Bronx, we also get the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. And that's what we see here in this picture today. On the left, the picture on the left would be roughly today's Westchester Avenue. That's the New York, New Haven, and Hartford tracks. And with the railroad, you get the abundance of factories. And a lot of these factory buildings stay up for a very long time. They fall into disrepair, and we can see that in the photograph on the right. And because of all of this industry along the Bronx River, it earns a reputation as being an open sewer. People are dumping industrial waste into the river. It's becoming an afterthought, except for the fact that, oh, maybe my cargo boat can go upriver. Sewer is built as a way to handle wastewater for the growing towns in Westchester County. And of course, a sewer is not the most pleasant thing to live around. So in the 1920s, we see an early attempt at restoration. We see an early attempt at trying to fight the impacts of the Bronx River Valley sewer. And that's why the Bronx River Parkway is created. If you were to look at it today, it's like, that cannot be good for the environment. But back in the 1920s, that was considered a good idea by having preserved parkland along the river that would be used for recreational purposes and enjoyment. So these are early photos of the Bronx River Parkway Reservation and the Bronx River Parkway. Again, this was built to be a recreational route for relaxed Sunday drives. It was not meant to be a major commuter route up and down between New York City. Of course, when the suburbs grew in the mid-20th century, it becomes more of a freeway, or similar to a freeway than the lighthearted recreational parkway that it was originally intended to be. And the Bronx River Parkway Reservation is in Westchester County. What's going on in the Bronx? Well, the Bronx River and the Bronx continued to be treated quite poorly because it had fallen into the background of many people's minds. However, that didn't hold true for some community members in the South Bronx, especially in the 1970s. Community residents understood that this river was there and wanted it to be something that they could enjoy, something their families could enjoy. So they took matters into their own hands. They put on protective equipment and physically went into the Bronx River and began to remove debris. And at the time, in the 1970s, it wasn't just a couple of bottles of Coke and Pepsi. It was heavy materials, cars, tires, and they didn't know what sort of pollution they were entering, but they were determined to turn the Bronx River into something that could be shared, something that could be enjoyed, something that could be celebrated. They were even able to enlist the Army Corps of Engineers to help remove some of this heavy debris. The Army Corps of Engineers enabled the community members to use heavy machinery to pull the cars out of the Bronx River. The New York City government, New York State government, were very supportive of the community members' initiatives. And through this work, the Bronx River Alliance, the organization for whom Christian and I work, was formed in 2001. And the Bronx River Alliance continues their work today to restore the Bronx River. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we do that in just a few slides. So what does restoration do? This is on the left is the same picture from earlier of the railroad tracks, the industrial landscape. And on the right is Concrete Plant Park. Concrete Plant Park opened in 2009, and as its name implies, was a former concrete plant that had been abandoned. And it had been a settlement for people who had nowhere else to go. They would live there, they had tents. And the community said, you know what, let's turn this space into something that could be used. Again, I want to use the word shared. And community organizations like the Bronx River Alliance, Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, all mobilized and were able to create this new park on the Bronx River. We changed the landscape at West Farms as well. So this picture was taken just below the number 2 and 5 trains, between East 180th Street and West Farms Square. What was once an unsightly back alley sort of landscape turned into the beautiful West Farms Rapids Park. Historically, there would have been a bleach factory in this area, just to put that in perspective. But now it's a place where people can relax when the train's not rumbling above my head. It's so funny because I host field trips, and I take the 2 train. And when I'm waiting for the 2 train to go home, nothing. When I'm teaching, it's running every 3 minutes. So the work that has been going on the Bronx River is working very well. We've got the Bronx River Forest around Burke and Allerton Avenues is thriving. The Bronx River Parkway Reservation is glowing green. However, there are still some threats that we are still working to address. One of the biggest threats to the health of the Bronx River is sewage. And there are 2 ways that sewage impacts the Bronx River. And it depends on where you are geographically. In New York City, we have what are called combined sewer outfalls. What that means is on a dry day, if you're in New York City, your wastewater, so that's your sink water, your toilet water, your shower water, it enters the sewer system and is processed and treated at a sewage treatment plant that clean water is therefore discharged into a larger body of water, such as the East River. All is well on a dry day. But when it rains more than 1/10 of an inch, so it's a very low trigger, the wastewater and the rainwater go into the same system, which overwhelms the infrastructure. And you get what is called an outfall. So on a rainy day, there is the opportunity for raw sewage to enter the Bronx River. So how that impacts people is, if it's been a heavy rain day, we have to call off our canoe trips, for example, because we can't have people in the Bronx River. This only happens in the tidal portion of the Bronx River, south of East Tremont Avenue, but that's also one of the most beautiful spots to go canoeing in. So we have to be very mindful of that. In Westchester County, we don't have combined sewer outfalls, but we do have MS4s. MS4 is an acronym for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, so 4 S's. And typically, with an MS4 system, only rainwater goes into the storm drain. Raise your hand if you think that's the case. Yeah. So there's a couple of reasons why illicit sewer discharges are going into Westchester County's MS4 system. One reason is due to aging infrastructure. This is a problem, especially in Mount Vernon. When old pipes crack, sewage leaks from those old pipes into the storm sewer pipes, and therefore some of that excess sewage goes into the Bronx River. Sometimes when people build homes and properties, they don't always connect to the sewer system legally, and they may have illicit hookups to the storm system. And then also runoff from lawns, for example, heavy amounts of fertilizer, or people who, we've all seen it, they take their dog poop and just throw it into the storm drain. That's going somewhere. And something I tell my students is that whatever you do on the street affects the river because of watersheds. The watershed is the network that feeds the river. So anything that goes on within the watershed is going to affect the river. So again, here's a map of the outfalls. So New York City has MS4s as well. Those are those yellow dots. But it gets to be uncomfortable sometimes. But I will say things are getting better. We do sewage testing and fecal bacterial testing every year. So here's some data. So we tested multiple sites along the river's length from Valhalla all the way down to the mouth of the river. The green line are Enterococcus is a type of bacteria commonly found in warm-blooded animals and what they poop out. So it could reflect human waste, it could also reflect pet waste, and it could even reflect waterfowl waste. But notice the peaks for wet weather. That's indicating that the rain is triggering something. That clues us in as to what may be going on. So Westchester doesn't have a combined sewer system. So when it rains, sewage should not be entering the Bronx River. But this data is telling us that it is. So there's a gap and a question we need to answer. In the Bronx, this is to be expected because of the combined sewer system. And then when there's Enterococcus present in the water on a dry day, that's indicative of something being extremely wrong that needs to be looked at. So how do we collect this data? We collect this data through a program called Project Water Drop. DROP is an acronym for Detecting River Outfalls and Pollutants. Volunteers are trained and go to various sites along the Bronx River to collect water samples and study the data. So they test for things like dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is healthy for fish to breathe. They test for nitrates, they test temperature, they test pH level. All of these clues, it's basically like taking the river to the doctor. How are its vital signs? We also collect samples to be processed in the lab for the presence of Enterococcus. So what we're going to be doing this year is going to specific outfalls in Westchester County. So we're going to be looking at Yonkers, we're going to be looking at Mount Vernon, and hopefully we can get answers to these questions. Is this outfall leaking when it should not be? Another threat to the Bronx River's health is the presence of floatable waste. So these are plastics, these are bottles. We find all kinds of things. Balls. A new trend has been scooters and bikes in the river. That's a fun one. And again, because of the storm drain system. So let's say you're walking down the street and somebody throws, an Arizona bottle. If enough rain comes down onto the street, that rainwater is going to force the bottle into the storm drain, where it's eventually discharged into the Bronx River. And not only is it unsightly, but it's harmful to wildlife. So another acronym, because we love acronyms at the Bronx River Alliance, we have a program called Project Waste, which stands for Waterway and Street Trash Elimination. We have a trash boom. A boom is basically a large inflatable barrier at 233rd Street, which collects plastic bottles and all sorts of debris that are coming down from Westchester County. We also have a boom further up, a bit past Bronxville. So the hypothesis is that the trash at 233rd Street is coming from Yonkers and Mount Vernon, the two bigger cities. And not only do we pick up the trash from the boom, but we take note of what kind of trash it is. For example, a new 7-Eleven just opened up in Mount Vernon. So if we see an increase of 7-Eleven bottles and cans and wrappers, then we know something's going on. There's a storm drain with a problem. If we see Dunkin' Donuts cups, we know, okay, something's going on. Maybe we should reach out to Dunkin' Donuts and tell them, like, hey, look, no more styrofoam. Back. But we want to collect data. And another reason why we like to collect data is because numbers speak for themselves. If we want to go to our elected officials and advocate for improved storm drains or more parkland along the river or more money to fix the sewers, we can go to them with these numbers as proof as to what we need. So styrofoam is massive. We find a lot of styrofoam. And something else that we've been noticing it's not even the cups, but these little styrofoam bits that look like they're from insulation or packaging. Something else that we're working on is called the Watershed Management Plan. So a management plan is basically a guideline for what to do going forward. And the Bronx River Alliance is working with a consultant to establish this watershed plan that will hopefully guide municipalities to make changes as to what goes on the Bronx River. So we've had a few public meetings in the past 3 months because we want to know the opinion of the community. What are you worried about when it comes to the Bronx River? And we still are recruiting survey responses, so you can use the QR code above to fill out our survey and let us know what concerns you about the Bronx River. What would you like your municipality to maybe fix? Now is your chance to speak up. Especially, we all know things are getting worse with climate change and resiliency. We all saw Hurricane Ida. So if there's a specific problem in your community, we want to know. And if we can guide a blueprint for the future to fix it, we can do our best to do that. Good news. I know I said something really bad, but it's not all terrible. Some restoration examples along the Bronx River include the restoration of the salt marsh at Soundview Park. A salt marsh is an invaluable protection against coastal flooding. It's nature's sponge. For those of you who don't know, most of the East Bronx was originally salt marsh. And then some mid-20th century developers thought, hey, let's build apartments. Not a good idea. We have added freshwater wetlands along the Bronx River Parkway in Westchester County. There has been bank stabilization, wetland restoration right over here by the Westchester County Center, and more. One of our big restoration projects is the revitalization of the Bronx River Forest in Bronx Park, planting native trees that are really fond of water and don't mind the occasional flood. And not only does that protect our community, but it's also a great learning opportunity for kids. I just had a hike today, took a bunch of first graders to the Bronx River Forest, had a great time. Urban ecology, it's the way to go. And how do we know this is working? Back in December, not safe for work, it's a little violent. We saw a bald eagle devouring a seagull in December. And in January, we saw a dolphin in the Bronx River. So it's working. Coyotes. Coyotes are quite common in our area now. There is a den at Ferry Point Park. Bobcats have been spotted. This has been caught by a trail cam. No actual person has spotted a bobcat. We see osprey, turtles, and so many fish. We've got sunfish. We've got menhaden. Menhaden are the fish on the lower right-hand corner. And menhaden are important sources of food for whales. And because of the increase in the menhaden population, we're seeing an increase in the whale population in New York Harbor. So people's efforts are working.
An Algonquin word for fertilizer.
Menhaden, because they decompose and they make the soil good. I heard they're real greasy though.
Mm-hmm. Fertilizer.
So we're always looking for support. We're always looking for help. We have lots of events. Bob Del Toro, you're here, right? Yes. He's the leader of the vine cutters, along the Bronx River Parkway, removing invasive species. Amazing program. We do tree plantings along the Bronx River, trash pickups. It's almost canoe season. We do nature walks, and we do advocacy campaigns. And I do want to invite everyone to the Bronx River Flotilla. Our annual flotilla is a giant boat parade that is also a fundraiser. We raise money to provide free community paddling for residents of the Bronx, and Westchester folks are invited. You just have to drive down. But if you're free, Saturday, May 6th, we're definitely looking for people to come join us at Flotilla. So that's about it for me. Christian's email is on this slideshow because I forgot to take it out. But if you have any questions or thoughts, you want to get to know us a little bit better, feel free to email Christian. My email address is my name at bronxriver.org. I don't know. And follow us on social media. But again, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and thanks for listening.
Wow, guys, thank you so much for coming. Amelia, thank you for presenting. Evan, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. If you'd like, I would love to move our Q&A outside, stretch our legs a little bit. We'll be a little bit closer together so we can kind of wrap things up. If you have to go, you can eat some more snacks while we do Q&A. So I'll see you outside.
Thank you.